Hello, Mike Pennacchi here, and we're out here in the wiring closet, and we're going to take a look at how we go in and deploy a fiber tap and the booster so that we can pull the output from multiple switches together and bring those into a single output that we're going to route back to the computer room into an IOTA 10 core. So before we start connecting any equipment up, let's take a look at what we have in the flyaway kit. We have our span booster right here, and this is what we're going to use to aggregate all of our 1 gig span outputs together. So this allows us to bring 8 1 gig inputs in and send it as a single 10 gig output. Here we have our IOTA 10 core. This is what we're going to use to do our packet capture and analysis. This has a number of inputs. We have 2 10 gig SFP pluses. We have 2 1/10 gig copper interfaces, and we have a couple of 1 gig copper inputs. So we can bring our data in on this, and we can use it to capture our traffic, analyze it, and if we need to, download it and load it up into Wireshark. Down below, we've got our 4-port multi-mode tap. Now in this case, I'm using multi-mode. I could just as easily use single mode, and I would just have a single mode tap here and single mode SFPs. So we'll be using that tap today. We have our Y cables, and as I'll explain later, these Y cables allow us to take the output from the tap and connect it to 2 different SFPs on our span booster. And lastly, I've got my SFPs. So in this case, I have 8 1 gig SFPs, and I have 2 10 gig SFPs. One of those 10 gig SFPs will go in my span booster, and the other one will go in the IOTA 10 core. So let's go ahead and get this equipment connected up. So the first thing we're going to do is we've got these switches right here, and these have 1 gig uplinks. We're going to take the 1 gig uplinks from those switches. We're going to run them through the tap. We're going to go from the tap to the switch that they were connected to back in the data center. Then we're going to take those tap outputs, we're going to run them to a span booster. So the span booster is a device that will take multiple inputs, aggregate those into a single output. So in this case, I have 8 1 gig inputs, and each one of those inputs is going to be one side of those tapped connections. So we'll have transmit from the switch here and transmit from the switch on the other end coming into a single device. Now this will aggregate that into a 10 gig output. What we're going to do is we're going to backhaul that 10 gig output back into the data center where we're going to have the IOTA 10 core. The first step in this case is going to be taking and putting the tap in line. Before I go in and hook up any of this equipment, one of the things that I always do is I use a click cleaner to clean the ports and the end of the fibers. So I've already gone through, cleaned everything in preparation for doing this, just to save some time while we're recording the video. So let's go in and start hooking this up. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to start with tap number 1. So I will pull the dust caps off of that. And here I have the fiber that's coming from switch number 1. I'll pull the dust caps off of that and I will plug that into A. I'm going to grab the fiber that is connected to the switch at the other end, and I'm going to plug that into port B on here. So now the tap is in the middle of that connection. And it's important to note that this tap is just doing an optical split of the light. So we're not going in and we're not boosting the signal, we're just splitting the light. It is a passive tap. Now we take those 2 transmits, we send them out 1 port. So let's go ahead and let's get the rest of those switches tapped, and then we'll come in and we'll put in our Y cables so that we can take the output from that tap and we can put that into our span booster. So I'll come in, I'll go ahead and pull out the dust caps for tap number 2. I will grab the fiber coming from the switch. I'll plug that into tap 2. I'll grab the uplink for that switch. I'll plug that into tap 2. I'll repeat that for the next switch. We'll pull those dust caps off. We'll grab the fiber for that switch. We'll plug that into the A port. We'll plug the uplink into the B port, and we'll take care of this last switch, switch number 4. We'll pull those dust caps off. We'll connect up the fiber from the switch into A, and we'll connect the uplink into B. There we go. So now I have my tap in place. Now, in this case, I'm putting the tap in to do some troubleshooting, and then when I'm done, I'll take that tap out. This is the kind of thing that putting it in advance is a huge benefit. If I put this tap in ahead of time, that means I don't have to come in and break these links. I can bring my span booster in, I can connect it up, and I can start monitoring traffic. So as part of the flyaway kit, I grab my tap out, I'm plugging it in here, so this is part of troubleshooting. But if I wanted to plan ahead, if I wanted to make sure my infrastructure was set up in advance, I would put this tap in when I had some downtime, and now I don't have to take anything down to connect up that tap. So let's go ahead and connect in our Y cables. Now, why do I call them Y cables? Well, in this case, we are taking a single duplex connection and we are splitting it into 2 SFPs, because each one of those SFPs has a receive. So for each one of our taps in our passive tap right here, we have 2 outputs. We have to route those 2 outputs to 2 different SFPs in the span booster. So to make it easier, Profitap has come up with the Y cable. The Y cable ensures that everything is connected to the right place the first time. So let's go ahead and put our Y cables in. So in this case, I'll take the twisty tie off of here. I will come out of port number 1 on my passive tap, and I will plug in my Y cable. Then I will take the 2 output ports from the Y cable, and I'm going to plug those into the span booster ports 1 and 2. And here's the cool thing. It doesn't matter which port I plug these into, because all of this traffic gets aggregated together into one connection. So now I've put the Y cable in there. The output of my tap is now connected to the span booster. So let's go ahead and we're going to repeat that for the other 3 taps. So again, I'll take the Y cable, I'll plug that into the output of tap number 2. I'll take those 2 connections coming off the Y, and I'll plug those into 3 and 4 on my span booster. Make sure everything is seated in place. I'll go ahead and pull the dust caps off of those other SFPs just to make that easier. I'll grab my other 2 Y cables and I'll hook those up. Pull my dust caps off. I'll grab the next tap output port. I'll hook up the Y cable to that output port. I'll connect that to the next 2 SFPs on the span booster, and I'll finish with my last Y cable. So now I have it all cabled up. I have my 4 taps in line with my switches. I've got my Y cables coming out of that tap and connecting to my span booster. So what this allows me to do is tap 4 1 gigabit per second connections, aggregate all those into 1 10 gig, and the great thing is I will never exceed more than 8 gigabits of input. 1 gigabit for each direction for each link tapped. Now I'm going to take that 10 gig output and I'm going to connect that 10 gig output to a fiber that I have running back to my data center. So this way I can backhaul all this tapped traffic back to that data center, and I can put my IOTA 10 core there in the data center. So I'll go ahead and plug that into my 10 gig link right there. And now I'm all ready to go. Now it turns into a lot of fiber out here, but it's all out here in the wiring closet where the switches are. And this means I'm not missing any traffic. I'm not trying to do a span of a 10 gig link. Instead, I'm tapping each one of those links. Now, one feature that is available on the span booster is we could assign a VLAN tag to each one of those 8 ports. What this would allow us to do when we're capturing the packets is see which port those came in on. So if I was diligent about keeping track of where each of those inputs was connected, so the transmit for each one of my 8 different connections, I would know exactly where that traffic was coming in. In this case, I'm not that worried about it, so I'm not going to bother setting up the VLAN tag. But for what I need to do out here in the wiring closet, I'm all set to go. So let's go to the data center and let's get this thing hooked up on that end. All right, just to recap, we have installed a 4-port tap and a booster, a span booster, in a different wiring closet that's tapped into 4 1-gig switches. Now, I'm going to take that 10 gig output from that span booster. We're going to hook it up to the IOTA 10 core that we have here in the rack. Now that we have our tap and our span booster in place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to hook up one of my management ports to a copper connection right there. Then I've inserted one of my 10 gig SFP pluses into one of the 2 SFP plus slots. Just as a reminder, we have 2 SFP plus slots. We have 2 1 gig / 10 gig copper ports and 2 100 meg / 1 gig copper ports. And then we have 2 management ports right over here. So I'll pull the dust cap off of that fiber SFP, and here is the fiber that is cross-connected to the span booster in the other wiring closet. I'll pull the dust caps off of here, and I'll plug that in. So now I'm all ready to go to turn on the IOTA 10 core, and I can start coming in and doing my packet capture and capture on all 4 of those links right there.